You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show with your host, Bryan Callen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Bryan Callen Show, where we have gotten the most elusive guest of all. Bryan Callen has shown up for his own podcast.
Bryan the Kid Callen, sorry.
And, you know, I mean, I think to put in proportion who today's guest is, you know, I, over the last 2 to 3 months, have been trying to seduce Bryan to come and do his own show with a series of increasingly impressive and appealing guests. You know, we had Joe Henrich on, who wrote, I mean, a mind-blowing book called The Secret of Our Success about, you know, culture and how that's allowed us to succeed.
Yes.
There are all sorts of amazing things in there. Bryan didn't show up for that.
I didn't show up
No,
for that.
We had Richard Nisbett on, you know, who has written, really is the guy who really started the charge against political correctness, a thing that Bryan hates and would love to see destroyed. You know, I mean, decades worth of amazing work. Bryan didn't show up for that. Then I had Richard Nisbett and Joe Henrich on together, figuring that, you know, if he could be there when political correctness died, that would get Bryan to show up. He didn't show up for that. He hasn't showed up for a whole bunch of amazing people.
I'm a working actor. It's been very hard.
But miraculously, you are here when Michael Malice is on.
I had to do it. I love the guy. And I was like, you know, look, man, I've been so ridiculously busy. You know, careful what you wish for, you know, when you're doing TV shows and all that kind of blah, blah, blah. But then,
and a podcast that makes...
Yeah, the podcast, The Fighter and Kid, got 2.7 million downloads last month. It's just become a monster, and basically how I live my extravagant and ridiculous lifestyle. I like good wine and even better cheese. So priorities first, my tummy and my genitals, and then my brain. And this serves my brain. But Michael Malice tends to scramble my brain, and I love how irreverent, how outrageous. Donald Trump with a brain. That's what I call him. Michael Malice. Michael Malice.
That's Donald Trump in the brain. You know, I just finished editing a book, and the opening sentence is "Careful what you wish for." So that's a cool little coincidence.
Wow, there you go. Yeah, you know, the thing is, what's popular isn't necessarily what feeds your brain, and
of course.
Yeah, I mean, you make these choices in life, but I love getting a chance to talk to people who are smarter than I am, and that would be you and Hunter Motz.
No.
So,
Hey, I'm pretty popular. I roll deep. I got a lot of friends.
No, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Enemies and friends, and I love it. I can't wait to pick your brain on this campaign and the state of politics today. Because the thing is, let me start with this. One of the things that I kind of realized, it's like a little thought, it's not a new thought, but I have friends, you know, it's amazing how a lot of my friends who've done very well in life and they've made lots of money and I guess on paper they seem fairly successful, but because they haven't had the time or really even maybe the interest to get into the deeper questions about political philosophy and spent the time reading and really formulating and earning an opinion, what happens is they tend to, when you talk politics, they say things like, well, they're all full of shit, so who cares? Or there's no such thing as Democrat or Republican anymore. It's all about money. And they dismiss everyone. And so what happens is they're not being fair to anyone or anything, and certainly not being fair to the ideas and the questions that could get us out of a lot of our problems. So in a way, they become part of the problem.
No, the problem is that these people are being forced to make judgments on things that they're not informed about. And that's a problem of democracy. So I mean, the idea that like the average layman has to have an opinion about the climate is crazy, or an opinion about physics, so that they should have an opinion about economics and let's suppose the Federal Reserve also doesn't make sense. But that's what happens when you have a democracy that puts all these issues on the table and encourages everyone to have their own very ill-informed perspective on it.
Well, wow. That's part of Francis Fukuyama's point is that, you know, you can take democracy too far. I mean, you know, should I be voting for the town sanitation commissioner or not, you know?
Right. I wrote a piece for The Guardian about why I don't vote, and I mean, people can look at my reasons there, but the idea is, Hunter, you just said, you know, how far do you take democracy? I would say anywhere. The idea that, like, me and my neighbors and who share the building with me are going to vote on how I dress or who I have sex with or what I put in my body is absurd. So the idea that people who I have no connection to other than geographical proximity, that they're going to have some say over my life, makes no sense on any level.
But the fact of the matter is, we do have problems and issues that require a lot of thought, maybe, and certainly compromise. And you want people who know what they're doing in office to be able to help us through those issues. I mean,
people knew. No, you're wrong. If people knew what they were doing, they would be scientists, or they would be lawyers, or they would be whatever. They would not be in office. It's impossible for someone who's a senator to have a good understanding of economics and foreign policy and this and that. It's literally impossible. So they have these huge staffs, and these people shouldn't be making these types of decisions. They're the ones causing the problem, and then they're marketing themselves as a solution, and then you double down the solution, the problem just exacerbates.
So how do we fix that then, Michael? Because we do. I mean, what do we do then? That's interesting. I like the way you're. It's an interesting thought.
But Brian, this idea of we is exactly what's wrong. I mean, you're already presuming the answer, which is everyone's got to get together and do something together, which is kind of the communist model, right?
Right.
The real model is if I want someone to help me, I will hire them. I'm not going to vote for them. And the problem is exactly these people who have appointed themselves due to popularity contests to proclaim judgment over other people's lives and to send people overseas to murder. So it's just the whole system is a complete, abomination. And the only solution is technology, as far as I've seen.
The only solution is technology. So what does that say about a voting and informed public, an informed voting public? There is no such thing then, and we shouldn't even aspire for it because it could never exist.
Yeah, when has there ever been an informed populace? Look, the central problem of democracy is this, and if anyone quotes me, they better give me credit. Someone who needs leadership is not. Those who need leaders are not qualified to choose them. That's the central problem of democracy.
Michael,
but it's true. If you're someone who needs someone to tell you around, how are you in a position to discriminate between different candidates? You're going to be judging on emotional or some kind of non-rational issues as opposed to sitting down. And the other hand is this. Remember in the 80s, you had Cokes and you had Diet Coke and you had Cherry Coke, and all these bad hack stand-ups used to make jokes about all these different choices in the supermarket. Yeah. But now I've got to pick the same guy who agrees with me on abortion, who agrees with me on war, as agrees with me on tax policy. That makes no sense, and this is an outdated, anachronistic system that's, I think, in some ways on its last legs.
And so, but let me give you some examples of where you do need at least some consensus. Airline safety.
Where? Consensus is the problem.
But listen, and I'm right with you on the fact that I lean in your direction for sure in terms of, I'm always wary of big collective government, blah, 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 but there are certain things you need government for. Let me give you an example. Airline safety, clean water. There are certain things that are, education, all these things.
Government education has exploded in spending over the last 50 years. Do you think people are negligibly more intelligent than they were 50 years ago?
No way. Of
course. And I'm not even saying that public education is bad, but the evidence shows it's surely not great.
Right.
And it surely does not correlate with spending. That's number one. Yeah. Number two is the education can easily be provided privately. Any kind of safety, look at eBay or Macy's or any store. When you interact with them, they're guaranteeing the safety of their product. So airline safety especially, the TSA is, it's just security theater. They're there to give you the demonstration that you feel safe, but they're not really in a position to do much of anything. And if the airlines had to guarantee who is going to get on their planes, in a safe manner, you'd better be sure they'd be more rigorous, just like bouncers are.
Just because it's their business, and they're going to be way more attentive to their business, their bottom line, their profits than some general body of oversight that doesn't have a dog in the game. Is kind of
is run by unions. Who hired? I was yelled at by a woman with a neck tattoo at JFK. Are you kidding me? I mean, no.
How dare you, woman?
What was the neck tattoo of?
It said Michael Malice is the best.
It said Allahu Akbar. No, think about it this way. What's harder to get into, a nightclub or the public library? One is run by private industry, and one is run by the government. And when the government runs something, they have to allow everyone in.
So if then we are on our last
and
legs.
Wait, one more thing, Brian, your water safety.
Yeah, I know that was
my
like
point. The only reason water safety is a problem is because government has given itself control over it.
It was a bad example because of Flint.
No,
it was like the worst.
It is a perfect example.
It's a perfect example of the fallacy.
Yeah. No. So then, as this radical libertarian, I think that's a fair assessment.
Like the anarchist, but go ahead.
Anarchist. So if this is an outdated modus operandi, if really this whole thing, this whole way we choose our politicians and is outdated, you're saying that technology will probably replace all of this and is?
Yes, and here's how I can prove it to you. Let's suppose it's 1969, right? And man has walked on the moon.
Right.
So clearly we're in a very technologically advanced place, right?
Right.
And we're having an argument about censorship. And some people will say, well, you got to burn some books because what if it's like Mein Kampf and the whole country goes to hell? And other people like, no, free speech. And you could sit and argue until the cows come home. But then if I appeared in 1969 and I said, all this arguing is irrelevant because in 50 years, I will be able to sit in my home and press one button and duplicate any book I want as many times as I want. And by pressing one button, I can send it at the speed of light to anyone anywhere on earth, and that person can only open the book if they know the secret word. I would be regarded as a complete lunatic.
Right.
And yet that's exactly what happened. And the cost of all this is zero. I would be regarded as a complete lunatic, yet that's exactly what happened. And now censorship is a moot point. So all these political arguments, I feel, are complete distractions because there will always be, since the beginning of time, since Pharaoh, someone who's going to want to control your life, and they're going to have some excuse for, to take control of your body or your money. And whatever the excuse is, I don't care. This is a technical issue that needs solving, and the way to solve it has only been through technology, which renders power asymmetrically.
What about the threat of terrorism and extremism? Don't we need a strong military?
The government is the biggest terror. The government. How many? There have been more people killed by cops last year than have been killed, or in the last 10 years, I believe, since they were killed in 9/11.
You still need.
And I mean, the government is the biggest agent of terror. Any government, in the world.
You still need cops. You still need an army, right?
Oh, come on. Okay, let me cops. Okay, let's talk about this. In a parallel universe right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where the cops are provided by the market and the government controls food, and every year the news reports where the famines are and how many people are dying. The Democrats will argue that we need to build more corn, and the Republicans will argue that we need to put out more wheat, and they will really dig their heels in. And the one person who says we can have the private market for food will be regarded as an extremist lunatic. And the cops are the exact same situation. Anytime you enter any establishment, you are going to be secure because of the person who owns that establishment. It's safer in a drunken bar where people are drunk and out of their minds than it is in an alley.
That's a good point. God, Michael.
But Michael, so
rebut, Hunter.
I'm not going to rebut. Listen, only a fool would challenge Michael Malice.
I know. His
but
mind works quickly.
The thing that I really would love to know, Michael, and part of what I was so excited about is, the last time we had you on, you described Hillary Clinton as Gollum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was I wrong?
Again, Michael, I would never dare to disagree with you. But what I would love to do is I would love to hear Michael's rundown of what he thinks of all the different presidential candidates.
And if you had to vote for one, who would it be?
Or I don't vote, but who I would want to be president is Hillary. And here's why. Hillary Clinton, I have predicted with you guys and elsewhere for a very long time, is a walking calamity. I've described her as America's mother-in-law because her only thing that she knows how to do is tell you you're doing it wrong, and even if you're doing it right, you're doing it the wrong way, right? And we remember in 2008, she claimed that as a first lady, she was under sniper fire when she was in Bosnia. Let's forget what an insult this is to the Secret Service, the idea that a first lady would be exposed to, enemy fire. But when she was confronted by this in the debate by George Stephanopoulos, she goes, look, the one thing I'm not is stupid. Well, I don't think she's stupid, but she's surely not as smart as she thinks she is. And her entire MO has always been the same. She never learns from her mistakes. And Hillary Clinton has done more to fight the government than any Republican ever has. And here's why. In 1993, unelected, Bill Clinton put her in charge of remaking health care, something she knew nothing about. She ran these meetings in complete secrecy. And then when she went in front of Congress, she was sarcastic and asinine. And it backfired so spectacularly that the Republicans won Congress for the first time in 40 years, and healthcare was dead as an issue for 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. And that Republican healthcare gave us a balanced budget. In 2008, she lost an election to a black kid who didn't even bother bringing his resume, which never even happens in McDonald's in this country. She is a walking mess, and everything. You wouldn't have Obama without Bush, and you wouldn't have Reagan without Carter. So politics works as a reaction, and she would do great things to discredit the state.
I've heard that before, actually, and that makes a lot of sense. Wait, let me say one more thing. Yeah. She's losing the primary to someone who isn't even in her party, which should be technically impossible. Meaning Bernie Sanders? Yes. What do you mean he's not in her party? I guess he's a socialist. He was an independent his entire political career. He just registered as a Democrat now so he can run as a Democrat. Wow. What, do you think...
It is pretty amazing to see the degree to which she is managing to lose with all the full support of the Democratic Party behind her yet again. If you had to, bet who was going to be president, who would it be at this point? It's a hard thing to do, but...
It's an easy thing to do. Trump. Yes, because Trump has done, because whatever people think of him, we have to look at the data, right? If you look at most political forecasters, they're just going by what they want to be the result. And they, like Jonathan Haidt says, right? You have your result and then you argue your way backwards, rationalize the outcome. So Trump has, when he first announced, something like 70% of people said, I will never vote for this clown under any circumstances, right? And he had 100% name recognition. And now he's in the lead, which means he turned people from never to yes, which is extremely hard to do. Usually, as people become familiar with you in politics, your numbers keep going down. That's why every president by the sixth year has, no real agenda to put forward because people are bored with them. The fact that he's been able to change so many minds over such a short period of time means this guy knows what he's doing. Now, he might not be speaking a language that any of us speak, but clearly he's saying the right things to get the results that he wants. And he would destroy her in a second. How would she go up against him in a debate? Anything she says will come up as shrill and hysterical, and her default is sarcasm. Well, though she's poorly. I feel like Hillary, though, is probably more informed on issues. That he's not terribly articulate. Yeah, he's just loud and ambitious. But informed on issues isn't the same question as what you asked. You asked who wins the presidential election. Yeah, formulating a good, clear and concise point of view that we can follow. Whereas Trump seems to be very general about we're going to make this country great again. Yeah, but what does the people respond to? Yeah, you really think articulate is what wins elections? Tell that to Adlai Stevenson. Or John Kerry, or John Kerry. Yeah, the long list of eggheads who have lost to guys who spoke with folksy wisdom. I mean, that was, Abe Lincoln was like folksy as all get out. Andrew Jackson, folksy. Yeah. Folksy and does well. And it's not even folksy. Just you wait until Trump on stage dares her to say the term Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, and she won't do it. She's screwed. Yeah. Yeah, she's too much. She's too liberal, or too much of an East Coast liberal for her own good, I guess. Well, but I think she's not quick on her feet. Yeah, she's not quick on her feet, and I think the other thing too is like there was a great thing super early in this presidential election where they asked Hillary Clinton what her favorite ice cream flavor was, and for the life of her, she couldn't give an answer. She just like danced around until she eventually was like, "I like all flavors of ice cream." But I think is Rubio finished? Is Kasich? Does he not have a chance? I don't see. So there's this myth that a lot of these conservatives put out that if all the anti-Trump people coalesced, they would win. But the numbers don't stack up that way because even if all those people dropped out, for many of them, the Carson people or Ted Cruz people, the Jeb Bush people, their second choice isn't Rubio or Cruz. Their second choice often is Trump. So the math just isn't there. Right. Rubio, I think is I mean. Chris Christie, God bless him. I mean, I have very few good words to say about anyone who's that ugly, but he took a bullet for the team by taking out Rubio. That was something terrifying. And I tweeted about this. Like, if Ayn Rand put Marco Rubio's debate performance in one of her novels, she'd be attacked as hysterical and unrealistic. How many times did he repeat that? 4 times? 5 times? Yeah. It was terrifying. It was amazing. Unbelievable. Yeah, he just panicked or something. I don't know what happened. So, Michael, what do you think of Ted Cruz? he is really a great villain, and not in a good way.
I think so. I mean, yeah, he's the devil. Really?
Well, he has that if you watch him, and look, I like to smirk. I'm pretty smarmy and think my poop don't stink, and that's fine. But you watch him, have this little smirk on his face, because I'm sure he's a very, very bright man. And then as soon as it goes to him, he starts babbling, conservative talking points with all the earnestness of a televangelist. So I think it's telling that even the Republicans in the Senate, go out of their way to personally say they despise him. I mean, that takes a lot of chutzpah for having. All those people hate him.
And also Craig Mazin, who's a friend of mine who was his roommate at Harvard. Who he went out of his way to write an article about what an a-hole the guy was. I mean, Craig is a good guy, and everybody likes Craig. So if Craig goes bad on you, you're doing something
He had
wrong.
those great tweets all about how I'm glad the rest of the country is finding out what I found out freshman year of college.
Amazing.
Ted Cruz is an asshole.
Amazing.
And here's the other thing about the Republican establishment. I don't think these guys are dumb. And if it comes down to Cruz or Trump, they would back Trump if they were smart, and here's why. Because if it's Trump, all the Republican candidates can run against him, and Trump can triangulate, right? He's saying, I'm running against the Democrat establishment, I'm running against the Republican establishment. They can both wink at each other, and the Republicans could be like, I don't support Trump, I'm going to write in Ronald Reagan or something like that.
Right.
Cruz, they got to fall in line.
Yeah.
And I think they would probably do equally well or equally bad, maybe. And why would they go off the cliff with Cruz when with Trump at least they can maintain their jobs?
Well, and also I think fundamentally the Republican Party has doubled down for a long time on the whole evangelical thing, and that has been super alienating. And Trump, for all of his obvious problems, at least offers a chance to repivot the party away from that evangelical and back towards the business focus, which I think is much more of a winning strategy.
Yeah, and the other thing, bro, I co-authored Matt Hughes, the UFC Hall of Famer's book, and when I hang out with him and his family, they're born again Christians. I have to watch my language, right? Like, because 4-letter words is kind of weird over there, and that's not an issue. But Trump is cursing every 4-letter word, including F, in front of these crowds, and they're eating it up.
Yeah,
it's
so
incredible.
He's broken them to broken them to his will.
Do you think he would be an effective president?
No, I think he would govern like Schwarzenegger governed California. Schwarzenegger ran a very similar campaign during the recall election, and they were like, Arnold, how are you going to, solve these debt problems? He goes, I'm going to stand up to the girly men and put forth a great budget that solves the issues. Yay! And then he was a complete disaster, right?
Yeah.
And Michael, I don't think Trump's particularly ideological, which is very healthy, because even though he talks in a very crazy way, half of those Republicans on stage were advocating war with Russia, and just because they have a nice suit and a calm affect doesn't mean that they're not crazy.
That's true, and I wonder if there's any, the guy has run businesses. I think he's been bankrupt 4 times. It's not like he's a genius businessman, and I don't like him, but I guess, he is somebody who knows how to run a business, and he probably comes from a place where he solves problems. He knows how to solve problems. So in that sense, maybe he'd be more effective than an ideologue.
And the other thing is, any New Yorker, like, despite whatever his rhetoric is going to be a lifelong New Yorker, is going to be 1,000 times more culturally liberal than a Ted Cruz or even a Marco Rubio. So that is something that's, a big asset in his side. Plus, he's driving all these horrible people near suicide, and that's a beautiful thing to behold.
Because they just can't touch him. He said something like, I could shoot somebody right now and I'd still be running. I'd still be leading the pack.
I joked, I'm like, I didn't know he was a cop.
Jeez.
And then let's talk about, so what do you think of Bernie Sanders?
The problem with Hillary versus Bernie is her claim is that they pretty much agree on all the issues, right?
Which is not true.
Which is not true. But then she plays the experience card, even though he's been in Congress longer than she's been in public office. So that doesn't make sense. And the other big thing is he would probably get a lot more of his program through than her, because he's friends with all these people. She's not alienated all of Congress. He's been there for over 20 years. And her big problem is he's clearly earnest. He clearly means what he says. Half it's crackpot, where she's a snake, and Goldman Sachs, and I'm not a big Goldman Sachs basher, but the idea that she's not in the pocket of all these horrible, horrible places is absurd. And he's clearly, someone who's an earnest guy, and people respond to earnestness.
Yeah, he doesn't have a script. And the other thing that I've heard people say is Hillary is always talking about I'm a fighter and I have all this experience, and Bernie's not talking about himself. He's just always talking about the sort of his ideology and the problems that we are faced with. So it's always about other people and the problems. It's never about him. He doesn't care what he looks like or anything.
And what are her accomplishments that she's like, I've done so much? Like, she never mentions any of them. You know, she points out that before Obamacare was called Hillary Care, and that's the whole point. Hillary Care was resoundingly defeated and took down her party with it. So she is a complete mess as a politician. And again, all this, I remember, Brian, and I'm sure you do, Hunter, you might be a little young for this. I remember in the 90s when the Clintons were in office and he was, you know, it was scandal after scandal after scandal.
Yeah.
And the media had to protect him, if only because they had to have some respect for the presidency. And if Bill Clinton goes on TV and says something that's an explicit lie, they can't say the president's a liar. They have to be like, well, you know, this, and on the other hand, blah, 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 blah. Now with social media, you know, they're completely being nailed to the wall to the point where ABC News asked Bill Clinton to his face about these past, you know, horrible allegations, and he didn't know what to say because in their ivory tower, they're never challenged or confronted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think pardoning Mark Rich and all these other people as he was leaving office to get Hillary elected to the Senate is something that I'm surprised hasn't come back.
Yeah, but it's like with the Clintons, which scandal do you choose? That's the problem.
They're so corrupt, right?
There are just so many of them.
She stole the China from the White House and had to give it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and here's the other big one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she did. She stole all this furniture. They're like, this is White House furniture, and they had to send it back. Yeah. So the other thing with them is, in the press, Monica Lewinsky has been a sex scandal. It was never a sex scandal. This is leftist, you know, propaganda. It was always about perjury. He lied under oath, which was a felony. And I remember at the time, everyone's like, well, he has to resign. He clearly committed a felony. And he goes, no, make me. So wait until that comes up again, and it becomes not a sex issue, but a perjury issue. I'm sure Trump has that in his back pocket, and that's something else she's going to have to dance her way around. And she's not a good dancer, as we've seen on Ellen.
Well, women, I was surprised to find don't trust her as much. Women tend to be way more wary of Hillary than, say, men are. Because I've always looked at Hillary as somebody who is, you know, fair. I think she means well. She's establishment. I don't think she's that far to the left. I think she'd probably keep things. I think she'd probably keep things as they are and probably be fairly effective at managing, or not effective at managing. But I don't think it would really affect the country the way someone like Bernie Sanders or Ted Cruz would do. They're so uncompromising. I feel like they just, you know, they try to push through an agenda, and if anything, it'd just be a stalemate. Whereas Hillary,
maybe. I mean, the same token. I mean, listen, I don't think that Hillary wants to change the status quo because the status quo benefits Hillary. She's really good at fundraising, right? Mm-hmm. And she's really good at campaign finance and all of those other things. And you know, she'll keep that system going. The problem is that the clock is ticking, right? The world is changing, and fundamentally, one of the biggest changes that's happening is automation is destroying a whole bunch of jobs. And if you're not creating a system that is allowing those people to get back into work, then you end up with a whole bunch of people who, you know, and that's what Bernie is responding to, a whole bunch of people who are poor, have a whole bunch of debt, and don't feel very invested in your system. And that's usually how revolutions start. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to make this point. First of all, Brian, I made that same observation with you, and what I realized is, we've all dated women who aren't that good, and it's usually our female friends who are like, what are you doing with her?
Yes.
Because women are much more shrewd at seeing through other women's crap than guys are.
They really are.
And we give them the benefit of the doubt. That's number one. Number two is, I would disagree that it would be a stalemate. I think Hillary would govern like Bill or like Nixon, because Nixon brought forth all sorts of left-wing ideas like the EPA, affirmative action, price and wage controls, if only for the sake of getting deals. And she sold her soul so much, and I think she's got so much PTSD from 2008 that she's just going to do whatever she can to pass legislation just so she could rack up accomplishments.
Yeah,
I agree with that assessment.
And it'll be, I mean, you know, like, did you ever did you ever read Bill Clinton's autobiography?
No.
Oh my God! So Katie O'Brien and I listened to that as an audiobook, and the title of the book is My Life, right?
Yeah.
And we subtitled it My Life, every single goddamn minute of it, because it's a 36-hour or 48-hour, I can't remember, audiobook.
Yeah.
But he like goes on and on and on, and there's like lots of folksy stories and all that sort of stuff. But the whole time you're trying to figure out what did he do, and the only accomplishment he seems to be able to definitively point to is the Family Care and Medical Leave Act, right? The idea that like, oh, if your family's sick or whatever, you get to take some time off work, right? And I think that's the thing is that, you've got to, the question is, do you want somebody who likes power and who likes being in power and therefore is willing to play the game in window dress? Yep. Or do you want somebody who has an actual worldview and is, that's the thing. A great leader doesn't just follow opinion polls. They have to do uncomfortable, unpopular things. And then they have to go in and they have to realize that I understand that you disagree with me. That's not because you're an idiot. It's because you know things that I don't know. Let's talk. Let's try and figure this out. And hopefully we can figure out something else. But I think, to go back to Michael's point about, Hillary's default being sarcasm, right? Sarcasm, ultimately, what's the emotion behind that? A lot of it is contempt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's contempt for others. And you can't, I don't think that Bernie Sanders has a lot of contempt necessarily for the Republicans, right? He may think that they're wrong-headed, but is he going to be willing to have a conversation with them and deal with them respectfully, as Michael says, as he's done for the last 30 years in Congress?
Exactly, I agree with that completely. And again, I think it was either Chesterton or C.S. Lewis made the point that I'd rather be governed by someone who's soulless than by someone who's earnest, because at least the soulless person will leave me alone sometimes, where the earnest person will never let me sleep.
Yeah.
So I think Bernie does definitely have good intentions. I think a lot of his policies would be catastrophic, but I think she would do great things for rolling back the state. And the Republicans would be prepared to fight her on day one. There wouldn't be a honeymoon period like there is with most politicians. It would be expected that they'd be. And how great would it be if she got indicted? How hilarious. Because she's not going to fold. Like when Todd Aiken said those comments in the Missouri Senate race, and all the Republicans, including Mitt Romney, were like, okay, you got to get off the ticket. And he said, no, blow me. And they're like, okay, there's nothing we can do. So they're not going to be able to get her to, take her hand off that one true ring.
Well, what do you think the country, I want to talk about the chance of her being indicted and why, but do you think overall the country is leaning more left, more right, or are we kind of being split down the middle? Or
do right and left even mean anything because they're constantly shifting and,
No, they're not. They very much mean something. They mean something with, do you have empathy with the weak or sympathy with the strong? Are you comfortable with inequality and power, or do you think we should judge society by how we judge the weak? So that's really the distinctions. Hierarchy versus egalitarianism are really the broad definitions of right and left. And the way to distinguish whether someone's right wing or left wing is you could ask them one simple question: are some people better than others? And if someone says yes, they're right wing, and if someone gives you a long speech, they're left wing and having cognitive dissonance.
That's really interesting. Wow. That's a good point.
I think we are. What's wonderful from my perspective about this country is, thanks to social media, we're becoming more and more extreme. We're talking less and less to people who disagree with us, and we're separating out into two tribes, which I think is very healthy. Because again, this country has been two nations glued together since the beginning. They tried to separate out in the Civil War. That didn't happen, and I see no reason for us to continue as two completely separate cultures just out of a sense of nostalgia.
What do you mean? We're two nations? Explain that.
Yeah, there's tribe red and tribe blue, and you can have this kind of southern, predominantly white worldview, which I'm not saying is bad. I'm saying that's their culture, and then we have this kind of urban, more liberal worldview. And these two things, one has contempt for guns and religion, and the other one views guns as normal and has religion. Mm-hmm. So why are these two groups being forced together? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think one of the things that does glue Americans together is the notion that I may be weak today, but I could be strong tomorrow with the right idea.
Americans are optimistic, right?
And also the fact that there's potential to be at the top of the heap. Yeah. That's very important. That is the American dream. That the American dream is alive and well, at least in the minds of most of our citizenry.
Yeah, but most progressives have complete sneering contempt for that idea. And they really think it's absurd and that there's huge chunks of Americans who will never be able to have that, and that's a lie. You tell poor people so that they're comfortable being poor. So, I mean, I hear that a lot in New York, and, you just kind of smile and nod.
Well, they never really give the people that do produce a lot of wealth, they never really say that, oh, by the way, they also put a lot of wealth back into the system and create a lot of employment, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Somebody was talking about John Steinbeck and The Grapes of Wrath, and they said it was a great book. It was a good book. It wasn't a great book. And the reason it wasn't a great book is it never gave the point of view of the people who owned those orchards and owned all that, all the orange groves and stuff. They had a point of view. Yes, they weren't treating their workers well, but let's see what their side of it was as well. They were dealing with a lot, and we never heard that point of view. And I think with Bernie Sanders and things, there is no. He does paint with a black hat anybody on Wall Street and anybody who's wealthy, and that's not helpful because it's also ridiculous. The people that I know have made a lot of money, by and large, are really hardworking. And in fact, in many cases, maybe because they've come from tough circumstances, they're also pretty compassionate.
But
I'm not saying they're rich,
But I think right. So the benefits that we've sort of accrued, with capitalism, right? Capitalism is a response to mercantilism, right? Mm-hmm. And it basically recognizes that the crowd is able to find solutions that the king and his buddies cannot find. Right. Now, the point is that in a short term, right, you can have a man who is blind, right, and who is blind in a particular way, who grabs the wheel of the ship and overcorrects in one way. But you can have all these people fighting over the wheel. So the question is the ship steering off course in a direction where, say, Bernie has this ridiculous simplistic worldview that doesn't give credit to the people who create wealth, but that maybe he's tugging the wheel to go the other way and making an overcorrection in the other direction. And because I would love to have, obviously, I often describe myself as a Rockefeller Republican, right? But such a candidate does not exist. We don't have anybody. We have a bunch of people who have these sort of distorted worldviews. And so the question is, do you want to pick somebody who has a distortion in the direction we most need to go? I just can't vote for guys who the Republicans like Cruz make it impossible to vote for them with their evangelical sort of social conservatism. I can't do it, man. And also I'm too much of a dirtbag, Michael. But also Cruz's smug contempt. I think that's the thing. People, it's one thing to talk about policy and all that and beliefs and all of that sort of stuff, but a lot of it is just attitude. There's a reason why Ted Cruz has managed to alienate everybody from his freshman year college roommate all the way through the Congress and the Senate. It's not a leader.
And Brian, I'm going to pick up on something you said. There's a great book. You may have even had him on the show by Thaddeus Russell called A Renegade History of the United States. And he makes the point that it's the very dirtbags who actually create freedom. Because when you're in a position where you have nothing to lose, you're not subject to social norms, and you get to push the boundaries of what freedom actually is. So he talks about how slaves, and for example, the first feminists, he argues, were actually madams because they had all this cash and they were buying up property, and they had property rights not because of marches, but because they were cash rich from all the whores in their houses. So I would highly recommend that book. And I agree, social change often does come from the bottom. But I'm just going to make one other point. I don't think there's any way in hell the DNC is going to allow Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. When Bob Torricelli was going down in the New Jersey Senate race, I don't remember what it was, maybe 2004 or something like that, they rewrote the rules and put Frank Lautenberg back on the ballot to make sure an election. All progressivism is about picking winners and forcing outcomes, and they're not going to allow someone who's not a loyal partisan to head their ticket.
But people who try and force outcomes very often end up failing. And in the same way that Hillary Clinton may end up destroying big government, I have a feeling the DNC may end up destroying itself by trying to force a candidate that people don't want.
Well, the Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the world. The American Democratic Party, oldest continuous political party in the world. So clearly they're doing something right. Mm-hmm. So even if they have to take a loss on a Biden or something like that, they're not going to allow themselves to be hijacked by an outsider. And you saw how heavy-handed there was with the debates and how they wanted to do everything they could to force Hillary to be a nominee. This is a big feminist issue for Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all those other in her coven running that organization.
Her coven. Wait, now Let's switch gears. When you talk to people,
well, my question is right. So, I mean, if as we start to think of this in terms of like, let's get really Manichaean with this, right? I mean, clearly Ted Cruz is the devil of this election. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has signed her name in the big black book and is, a witch and has a coven of witches. So, okay, good.
You're getting that. This is the Malice manifesto.
That's what I want.
Yeah,
I
my favorite.
I am ultimately, I'm fully aware that, I am a primate with all sorts of delusions about myself. And I fully embrace the fact that I'm superstitious and religious, and I need to know who is the devil in this system, who are the witches,
So far, I agree with Michael.
Yeah, I do too.
Michael, when in my town here in Los Angeles, and really, the things I read, Citizens United is considered the worst thing that the Supreme Court has done, ruled on, maybe ever. I mean, what do you think of money in politics? What do you think of super PACs?
It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
You see how I lob those softballs?
Yeah,
you see how I just lob them for the firebrand?
I don't believe in the Constitution, but if you're going to follow the Constitution, it explicitly says Congress shall make no law abridging free speech. It doesn't say political speech. There's no exception. No law means no law. If you're going to have the mob, they're going to have the numbers. So the only way for a business to defend themselves is through propaganda. I mean, that's where you balance things out. So it's a very healthy counterweight. It's simply legally true. So I don't see any way around it. And the idea, again, that I should have as much say in running my company as my employees or people on the street is insane. I mean, it's just like people who have never run a company telling people who ran their company well how to run it poorly is really what the goal is of people who are against Citizens United.
Explain that more. Dial on that a little bit more.
Meaning, like, I don't know how to run, like whatever a television network. So I'm going to tell the guy who runs the television network well to the point that's profitable how to run it differently, which can only mean poorly.
Meaning,
that makes no sense.
That's so. In other words, by telling people there's a limit to what you can contribute, or you have to be anonymous with your contribution, or whatever.
No, I just mean through politics. Like, politics means I have a business, and now how I run my business is open to public discussion through democracy. That is crazy.
How do we stop Washington then from becoming an economy of influence, which it is? How do we stop?
It is not possible. That's why I'm an anarchist. It's from the very beginning. Rich people are always going to have more things and better things in every country ever on earth. Mm-hmm. And the more you centralize power, the more the disparity. Look at, Soviet Russia, look at North Korea. Mm-hmm. The people at the top have everything, and the people even at the 10th percentile have nothing. So unless you get this idea out of your head that you can fix this cancer, it can't be done.
Well,
How even theoretically can it be done?
But you're saying that you can fix the cancer by removing it. Right?
You don't have to remove it. You have to have workarounds. That's where the technology comes in.
Yeah.
The cancer will always be there. Whenever you have an asset, even in animals, the strong animals are always going to have disease. They're going to have parasites. You can't prey on weak. You have to prey on the strong if you're just going to be a leech. So you have to find workarounds that will kind of bind their hands, because they will always have some excuse. If I can't produce something, I'm going to have to take it from someone who can. So,
Michael, here's a question for you, because I know that Bryan and I are consistently, and I'm sure many of our listeners are, but what I would love to hear, or more importantly, read the Michael Malice manifesto, like a fully laid out view of the world. Well, he's already said he's an anarchist. No, I know, but let people figure it out for themselves. But profit motive, right? Mao had his little red book. Gaddafi had his little green book. I don't know what color. Michael wouldn't have a book. That's the point. No, I think
I'm an author.
He's an author, of course.
Sorry, buddy.
Anyway,
sorry, buddy. Sorry.
But that's
trying to help you out here.
Firstly,
God, I'm such a turncoat.
What color would your book be, Michael?
Oh, that's a great. Probably ice blue.
Oh,
or pink and bumpy, or the tone of my skin, pink and bumpy, and 49.
But what I mean, have you ever thought of writing the ice blue book?
I have. But we got a ways to go. I just wrapped 2 books, as I was telling Bryan before. I'm probably going to work on another one, dealing with the whole MRA space. But yeah, I think I'm a little young to put this all together. But I was going to, you know how there's the God delusion?
Mm-hmm.
Right, so I would write something called the government delusion, and just basically break down how this really is just a barely secularized religion. But again, I agree. But I can recommend a couple of books that will really, Hunter, I recommend them to you over email. But there's 4 books I think that people need to read, and they'll finally get all of this, which is The Blank Slate by Jonathan Haidt.
I've read that. No, it's by
Pinker.
It's by Pinker. Stephen Pinker.
I'm sorry, Stephen Pinker. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. The Idea of Decline in Western History by Herman, which I just finished, and Thaddeus Russell, which I mentioned earlier, and also this great book called The Machiavellians, which is out of print by James Burnham, and his point is something called the circulation of the elites, meaning if you knock out, there's always going to be an elite in any organization, and if you knock out the elites at the time, they're just going to be replaced by another elite. It's inevitable, which just discredits everything left of center.
That makes sense. I mean, look at history. It's never been any different. There is always an elite. There is always. Look at prison. Prison is,
even if you have a town meeting, someone's going to be chairing that meeting and deciding what's up for discussion. So right away, and the term pecking order comes from birds. So even birds have established hierarchies. So this is inevitable.
But having said that, if that's the way it is, then you have to work within those confines. That is human nature. That is always how it's going to be. So then, isn't that then going to always lead to government? That's always going to be the way it is. Someone is going to take central authority, and then the fight ensues. The big questions in political philosophy: who governs the governor, and all those things come into play. And then you have people who say, "Hey, let's make the playing field more equal," and other people say that's not how nature is, and you can never actually do that, a la Michael Malice, and probably butting heads in that arena of ideas is a good thing. I mean, that's kind of how...
No, I think I disagree, because when I go to Macy's is in charge, and if someone comes to my house, I'm in charge. So in a private society, whoever's property you're on that's the person who's governing that property. So it's not any more complicated than that. And we go about our day-to-day lives doing this. If you go to a fancy restaurant, they tell you have to wear a blazer, you wear the blazer or you don't come in. So we're used to being governed. The government doesn't have to be one thing for all times, 24/7.
But it does in this context. Look, we are conflict resolution has got to be mediated by a neutral body. Listen.
Yeah, but not a government body.
Well,
eBay. If I go to Macy's
a
and
tribal jerga, I guess, but
Okay, if I go to Macy's and there's a filth on my sweater, right? Their policy, we have a conflict, right? I want to return the sweater. Their policy is laid out perfectly right there. So they will which is easier, to sue someone or to return clothes that you've worn? And if I further have a conflict with Macy's, I could take it up with my credit card company. And if not, I take a loss. Even if I just take a loss, it's better to take that loss for the sweater than try to sue someone and recover it through the government, which will take years and thousands of dollars. So conflict resolution in no sense is a function of government, and government only causes conflict. And we know this because every politician says, I'm fighting for you, which means they're fighting against somebody else. So the basis of politics is conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. But look, we are built on some basic principles. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. Keep your promises. And if those 2 agreements are broken, you have to make it right. That's where contracts, that's where courts come in, that's where a lawyer comes in. Those things are very important. Having contracts that you can enforce, that mean something in a society, and having an objective court of law that makes that so is crucial. You couldn't have private courts, could you?
Every contract I've ever had for every book I've done has a clause that specifically says, if there's a problem, we won't sue each other. We will take it up with arbitration. Every single contract, because lawsuits are so onerous and so open-ended, whereas arbitration is market-driven, so it's based on resolution. And the thing is, this idea of justice is a religious concept. Sometimes, Bryan, let's suppose me and you have some kind of, you sold me something, I didn't like it, but it was an honest disagreement. We're going to just split the difference sometimes. Like, I'll pay for shipping or you pay half for shipping. That might not be just, but we're both happy and we'd rather have a long-term relationship.
Sure.
So this idea of we have to have 100% justice all the time is a religious idea. It doesn't port to reality and leads to dangerous consequences like war. Because war is like, you disrespected me, Putin, I'm going to go in and kill you. Well, I'd rather be slapped in the face than have thousands of people be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, when we look back at man's prehistory, right, Jared Diamond in his book, The World Until Yesterday, he talks about, the sort of conflict resolution that has dominated most of human history. And a lot of it is about just like sitting the people down together. You have some sort of intermediary who goes between the two parties and talks to them and really hears their side. And then there's a settling and a fairness. And it's not about some arbitrary rule. It's about like trying to make the situation whole, right? Trying to make everybody feel like, they've
justice being defined as everything in its place.
That's right. And everybody has been heard and all of that sort of stuff, rather than some sort of rule, which, if you look at what happens in a lot of these developing world societies, which are fundamentally unfair, what has happened is that, you get these really expensive lawyers who know how to dance around that particular legislation to create a solution that is fundamentally unfair, because essentially, you get all the marbles, which is not really what should have happened.
Well, it's Michael. It's also like, and that's a very good point, Hunter. And also, as you were talking, I thought to myself, gun control is hilarious to me, because there are already something like 350 million guns in circulation. We make 20 million new ones every year. And whenever I hear people talking about gun control, the idea that you could stop a maniac from getting a hold of a weapon it seems like such a losing proposition. Gun control in itself seems like, I actually think the way to make things safer might very well be education on how to use a gun, and everybody gets to carry a gun if you want. I mean, in a way, at least there'd be bullets coming back.
Well, I agree with a couple of things. First of all, this is what I was talking about earlier, how we have the blue tribe and the red tribe, and it's not about safety. The blue tribe wants to stigmatize guns. That's why kids can't even have toy guns, and they just want to impose their culture onto the red states. It's kind of like a localized form of imperialism. That's number one. Number two is, if the Republicans were smart, they would try to push for, in the same way that Obamacare has mandatory health insurance for everyone, an individual ownership mandate, you would have an individual gun ownership mandate, meaning you have to own a gun or you pay a fine, and watch the left have a complete meltdown.
That's kind of outrageous, but
if they were, because the whole point is, let's make this, it's a cultural issue. It's not about safety. They just want their culture to be imposed on this other culture.
Well, both cultures are not talking to each other. They start with insults. First of all, you're a gun nut and you're a bleeding heart liberal, and they start there, and nobody's talking to anybody. You like guns because you're a dummy, and you don't like guns because you're a pussy. It starts with these kinds of things. My issue is just from a practical standpoint. I don't think with all those guns in circulation, I don't think it would ever be possible. And mainly because another thing about men is that men want to feel like they can protect their home. I'm one of those guys. It's in my DNA. And you're not taking my gun away. I want that option. And I have two guns because if the shit hits the fan, I want to have an answer. It's just how I am. I've always been that way, and I'm not a rare bird. Most guys, call us cavemen, most guys feel that way in one way or another. And so, good luck trying to change my mind, and good luck trying to get all those guns off the street. It just doesn't seem practical. So when they're talking about gun control, Hillary talks about gun control, I really want to say, do you really think that's something we could implement? Is that really something? Is that the way to go? It's a little bit like Trump saying, let's build a wall to keep all these illegal people out. It's the same mentality, building walls, let's bomb them until the sand looks like glass. That's the wrong way to think.
Yeah, by the way, that Ted Cruz comment, I mean, in a long list of objectionable things that Ted Cruz has said, that was particularly objectionable.
It's offensive to me.
And first of all, I think people need to hear that Trump was the one saying, I'd rather spend $2 trillion on public schools than spending them on war, which is really the healthiest thing any Republican candidate can say, number one. Number two is, I love it when women who are pro-choice are like, men shouldn't have a vote when it comes to abortion. And the response is, well, honey, if you're not comfortable with guns, I don't want to hear your opinion about it either. So the Second Amendment is pretty unambiguous. It was recently adjudicated by the Supreme Court as an individual right, and I think all gun control laws are completely unconstitutional and defy in the face of the law.
Well, first of all, I think there are 20,000 laws on the books already concerning guns. Already, there are a hell of a lot of laws.
Yeah, but that's a separate thing. The legal
they
code
haven't worked, is all I'm saying.
Well, the point, but I think also the legal code massively needs to be simplified. I mean, Luigi Zingales, right, in his book Capitalism for the People, people, right? That's a big part, right? The legal code has become so complex that the only people who can hope to navigate it are elites, right? The people with enough money and enough lawyers.
Michael Malice would say that's inevitable. That's inevitable.
No, I don't think that's necessarily inevitable, but the point is, I think that it is absolutely by design, right? There is, an evolutionary, yeah.
I'm going to say one more. Let me just say one thing quick, talk about the two cultures. People in blue states have this idea that we have to have people who have mental problems aren't able to have gun rights, right? And until I went to a red state, I'm like, wait a minute, because I met a guy who was an Army veteran, and any of them who have PTSD, which is very normal, well, that on paper is going to keep you from having a gun. And these are the people, if anyone in my community who should have a gun, it's people who have served, because they're not cops, but they know how to use weapons to protect people who need protecting. Yep. And yet, when you live in a blue state, you don't know people like that. So you think mental illness is a great way to stigmatize those who shouldn't have guns, and it's actually a terrible way.
Well, also, how do you define mental illness? If I was depressed at one point in my life, does that mean I'm mentally ill? I mean, it's a very amorphous, ambiguous term too. And who decides?
Here's a question though for you. I'm excited to hear the answer to this, Michael. Right. So, there is a certain argument that makes a certain sense, right? Which is that, per Bryan's point, right? At least if people are going to have guns, let's hope that they're well trained and they actually know how to use them and all that sort of stuff, right? Yes. And people have to get a license in order to drive a car, right? And they can lose their license, if they get, have vision problems or get too old and too senile and can't focus. Do you think that firstly, do you think that's a good idea, the whole concept of a driver's license? Which I would think would be a good thing, but who knows?
No, don't ask Michael that.
Yeah, what do you think of driver's licenses?
If you had private roads, then you'd have to recheck your driver's license every year, probably, don't you think? It would be a much higher barrier to entry to enter those roads if there was a company running it, as opposed to you have to pass a test once and you could take it as many times as you want, and you don't have to check it when you age, go past a certain age where everyone's reflexes and whatever go down. I don't have a driver's license, so this is something I'm not really in a position to speak on that much.
And regardless, this is definitely one of those areas where technology is going to solve the problem, because once we have automated cars, you won't have anyone driving.
Correct.
Michael, finally, because we've taken up almost an hour of your time, the thing is, what would you do about people who can't help themselves in this society, the infirm, people who need real help?
You know what? Honestly, that to me is probably the most legitimate use of government, is making sure these people are taken care of and treated with dignity. And actually, I was watching The Apprentice back in the day, and Penn Jillette, his charity is something called Opportunity Village in Las Vegas, where it gives jobs to people who are mentally disabled, and they do things like stuff envelopes, or they sewed Elvis's costumes, but they had a sense of pride in their jobs. So, and this is also a great resource for the role of churches in society, because the Catholic Church very much believes that every soul is worth saving. So they're very strong in this field, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. It's easy to mock the church coming from New York, and I don't, because religious people, this is something that they really fervently believe in, and I think that's great.
Very true.
And I think that's the thing is that, again, when you start to dig back, you start to find out that even there was a Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Summer of the Gods, which was all about the Scopes monkey trial, right? Yeah. And when you watch Inherit the Wind, it's look at these idiot backward creationists and all that sort of stuff, but the textbook that they were fighting against was a book that taught evolution as a justification for social Darwinism and sterilizing people in eugenics and all of that sort of stuff. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, so and during the whole eugenics movement, a lot of the people who fought against eugenics were Christians, right? Who believed in that sort of universal human dignity and all that sort of stuff. So these objections to evolution were actually grounded in principles that a lot of people would frankly agree with, which is that you shouldn't force sterilize people, you shouldn't kill people, you shouldn't do all of these
Michael Malice is a godless Christian.
Oh my God.
You see that, Michael? You see what I did with 15 seconds left? You see how I buttoned this up?
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I just did. Yeah, that's right. That's what you get when you get on the Bryan Callen. the Hunter Mott. When Bryan Callen's a guest on the Hunter Mott Show.
I like the idea that when Bryan Callen is a guest on the Bryan Callen Show.
Exactly. Michael Malice, you always have a standing invite. You're so much fun, and I love hearing you talk. And when I come to New York, dinner's on me. I know we say this, but I promise.
It's the highlight of my week. I love it.
You're the best. You're the best. Michael Malice, ladies and gentlemen, give us some books, please, that we can read and we can plug.
He gave us his 4, and then obviously Michael's
Let me hear him again.
Connor, let me do my plug, please.
Please.
Jesus.
If people want to read everything they need to know about North Korea, they could just order Dear Reader. And, of course, as Hunter knows, my biography, Ego and Hubris.
Yep.
You could get that on Amazon. It's a graphic novel.
Great books. All right, you're awesome. You're always fun, and we need more of you. So you have a standing invite, my friend. Go with God.
Love it.
Go with that non-God, Michael Malice.
And we look forward to the Ice Blue book.
Somebody put chains on that man. Chain him down. Your ideas are dangerous. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show with Bryan Callen. Be sure to like him on Facebook. Just search for Bryan Callen Comedy. And follow him on Twitter. Just search for @Bryan Callen. You can also find him online by visiting his website. Just go to bryancallen.com. Until next time, bye-bye.